We're doing it? Yes. Okay. So, all right. Kind of shake up last weekend mentally, I guess, or this last weekend mentally, and kind of review what we talked about last week. So, remember we talked about influences of perception last week, and then tried to apply it to Family Feud Australia whenever we met again on Wednesday. So what were the three things that we talked about that influence our perception? Asia, you look like you're really trying to grab through the recesses of your memory. And it's okay, we're just trying to get our minds back into the swing of the force. So what was the first one? Cultural, right? And it really kind of comes down to that us versus them mentality. And then what was the second one?
Physiological.
What is it?
Physiological.
Physiological. And so what physiological things kind of influence the perception that we have of the world? Age, health, yes, good. Okay. And then what was the last thing? Social. And social kind of encompasses what? Gender, occupation, yeah. So how did we kind of see that that social role component displayed or demonstrated in the Australian Family Feud? Can you guys remember it? Yes, Asia.
I mean, I found it kind of not only cultural but also social when they asked about what when straps came up and they said like reins and saddle.
Reins and saddle.
Well, them being from the same family, that's probably something that they do together as a family. So that's like the first thing that came to their mind. My first thought would have been bra.
Right. Which was the top answer was bra, but dependent on something that they probably experienced as a family. And family ties definitely correlate with those social roles. They probably thought of, horseback riding or something. How many of you guys ever grew up riding horses? Lucky. Oh my gosh.
My grandparents have a farm in Farmington, and they have 2 horses and a pony.
So you got to have some experience.
Yeah, it wasn't like anything fancy. It was just kind of my grandpa put a saddle on the horse and he walked me around.
Okay. So you at least got to ride around somewhat. Do you know what currying is? No? Does anybody know what currying is? No? Okay. So my in-laws also have horses, and I was asked to go curry one of the horses, and I looked at them and I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but I'm going to pretend like I do and walk over to the barn so that I don't embarrass myself to my in-laws. And I secretly text my husband. I'm like, what's currying? And he's like, it's where you go brush the horse. So I was like, well, where's the horse brushes? And he's all like, they're on the wall. And all I see is a collection of these metal contraptions. And I'm all like, I don't see a brush. In my mind, what would a brush look like? Something similar to what we use in our hair, What they have are these metal things with they're circular and they have a handle, but there's teeth on them. And so that's what you use. And I grabbed one, and me not being very well versed in horses, all the horses saw me grab the curry and started rushing at me. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die by a stampede of horses. But that they really enjoy being curried. I didn't know anything about this stuff. I wouldn't have had any kind of situational awareness of this or how my perception had been influenced what was going to occur. And then I get a text message later from my husband being like, oh yeah, watch out. The horses will bum rush you because they love to be curried. But situationally, social roles, cultural roles. If you kind of grow up in a culture that really kind of loves horses and they have it as just a part of their everyday experience, they know an entire array of various different things that kind of go along with this and might influence how they would even respond in a situation where they're all like, when you think of straps, what do you think of? Straps, Most of us, if it's a gender thing, females might think bra straps, which turned out to be their their top number one answer. So, I mean, those types of things are always something that I would encourage you guys as you're looking at your microcultures online to start really taking into consideration. And I do think that come Wednesday, I'm going to try and implement some site in which we would evaluate and look at what would influence the perceptions of the participants. Because how many of you guys in here still are involved with your microculture, your online microculture, and it is not just isolated to this area? How many of you guys have one that it has a global setting, right? Some of it is more local, but each one of those participants, members of your particular group, are going to have various different backgrounds, things that influence the way they see the world around them, just as you have various experiences that influence the way you see the world around you. So, we also talked about informants being the most recent ethnographic assignment, correct? That one I think is going to be due this Thursday, October 1st. So you guys have a relatively clear understanding what informants are then, right? They're people that you're kind of observing and interacting with to some greater or lesser extent. And hopefully you guys have kind of had some moment of interaction at your online sites, or at least you've been witnessing a lot of things kind of going on. But keep in mind, at some point in time, you will need to interview some of these informants. And at the end of the lecture, I'll kind of go through some important things to keep in mind whenever you're looking for informants and people you'll need to talk to. But really quick, I'm going to go over the next ethnographic assignment. Not that word is a, oh well, we'll go over here. So the next ethnographic assignment is initial methods. This is really just a 500-word account of things you've done so far at your site. So you're going to address the following questions. What steps did you take to initiate the project? How did you explain yourself, or if you had to explain yourself so far? And if you haven't had to explain yourself, what is it that your site allows for? Is it the anonymity of the users? Because suddenly you kind of get put into that bracket of participants that are already involved in that. Because not all sites will ask you to like state yourself or your intention. Some sites will be like, hey, here are some of the rules that you need to follow by whenever you're here on this site. And some of those rules are like, be courteous to people, don't sit there and use a bunch of profound language. For instance, whenever I was trying to think of a good example that I can show you guys on Wednesday so that we can kind of go through and have a broad explanation of how we're going to be really looking at the influences of perception, about how people interact with one another, about what these groups' goals are. I was looking for one, and it is one of the favorite things that I watch on YouTube. But he had been banned from his comment section. Apparently, there was content in it that the YouTube administrators were like, well, we do not like this actual kind of like discourse going on. It's not appropriate for children, or something along the lines. And so he's lost it. But I haven't seen that as a normal thing consistently throughout various different YouTube channels. So that was kind of something that I was like, it'd be really challenging for me to be able to see, you know, in the comment section of YouTube, where you can kind of see people talking to each other. They like or they dislike, that type of thing. So that was something that I observed, but it would be really a different type of thing where I wouldn't have to explain myself coming in and watching this particular channel. And so make sure that you take note, depending on your site, whether or not those are things that you've had to actually implement is an explanation. And then also, what have you done while you're there at the sites? What we're going to call these like field sites. They're not, they're virtual. But how much time have you spent observing per week? Even if it's just like for a little moment where you might catch something, it may have been a site that you have already been involved with or familiar with. How often do you look through it? How often do you peruse? How often do you chat in it? How often have you been touring around, kind of familiarizing yourself, if these tools are new, familiarizing yourself with the interface
So make sure you take note of that. Also, what do you feel like you've accomplished so far? How much information do you feel that you've accumulated? Are you feeling more confident at this point in time in what it is we're actually doing? And if not, don't worry, I'm going to be kind of taking the next couple of weeks to really identify certain things that maybe you can translate to your own site. And what might you change about the progress of your research so far? Because remember, I've asked you guys to imagine yourself as researchers for the remainder of the course. You guys are looking at this through that, scientific mind as you would imagine it being, to apply to this research project, because ultimately it will have a final report, right? So that is 500 words. Hopefully I've given you guys at least 5 different questions to help you along. If you come up with other questions to help you along with it, that's perfectly fine. But try to make sure that you answer these. I mean, 5 questions to 500 words, that's, a couple of idea topic sentences, and then maybe 2 to 3 sentences describing it. So it shouldn't be hard to accumulate that 500 word minimum, right? Do you guys have any questions about that particular assignment that's coming up? Are you guys comfortable at this point with the pace in which I'm putting up the assignments through Moodle? Because I will try to bombard you guys and make you get lost in it. Sometimes there's a lot of stuff to kind of work out with the structure. Okay. Also, let's talk about journals really quick, because journals are those other assignments that you guys are consistently tasked with doing weekly. But I'm going to give you guys a couple of hints about how we take journal notes and a couple of purposes and functions to help you guys through this process. So, do you guys remember the quotes? And this is written in almost every single one of your journals. Instructions, at least the descriptions, it says the palest ink is superior to the best memory. And what does that mean? What do you think?
Better to write something down than nothing at all.
Yes. It's better to write something down than to try to just remember it later. And the reason is, especially in work like this, is that you might be like, oh, I'll remember that, right? I'll just remember it and write it later in an assignment or something else. Or a future assignment that come along that's going to ask you to recall a specific thing that you took note of mentally, except now you're kind of fuzzy on the details. Now there would have been really good information that would have helped you with the analysis assignment that you're just like, oh, where did I put that? I didn't write it down. And so if you didn't write it down, it's almost like it didn't happen with the SIP research. Like you've got to write it down. So always, if you take note of something, make sure to write that down. Make sure to write it in your journal, especially because these journals are not going to be graded based on your punctuation, your spelling, or anything like that. These are completely free-form writing that you're allowed to use. It's for your own personal use and disposal. So make sure to write it down. And so these field notes are definitely the most important part of what we're collecting. This is our data. This is how we are able to observe cultures. Even if you find yourself traveling in the future when they lift all these restrictions of the Americans, if you find yourself traveling in the future and you're really wanting to immerse yourself into a culture, this is part of it. This is writing things down. This is understanding how people view the world differently than us. So make sure you write it down. Any type of noteworthy events, practices, remarks, expressions that you've noticed, and we'll get into more detail on that in here in a moment. Think of acronyms that are used. Have you guys noticed a really high volume of acronyms used these days? When we get into community discourse, I'll give you guys a couple examples and you guys can make them too, because apparently I am very out of trend and I don't know some of these acronyms that are used these days by you young kids. So acronyms that may be used at your particular online site might be something that you have to learn more about. But even if you've already learned what it means, like if you figured it out, go back in your journals and revisit it and write it down. Be specific about what it is. And try to determine why it becomes this acronym used so predominantly amongst the people at your online site. It can also be relative like transcripts from informal interviews. Like if you talk with somebody on your site and you just go back and you kind of write down what the conversation was about, what they said, what you said, you could screenshot it maybe if they're comfortable with that. Remember, we always get permission. And then you can kind of go back and really like evaluate it at a later time, or whenever you're reflecting on what you had just kind of encountered. And then we have something where I'm going to give you guys various different types of notes that you can have, and I'll give you guys a couple of examples so that maybe it will help you in that process of writing. So descriptive notes. These would include things like daily events, descriptions of encounters that you have, notes during and after the interviews, observations of activities that you may have participated in or just witnessed. So here's an example. Now I'm going to go back to this one thread that I just keep watching because I can't get enough of just watching how I don't really enjoy politics. I've never really kind of considered myself a political person, but I just noticed it is the climate these days, right? You can't really swing a cat without hitting, swing a dead cat without hitting something that seems politically motivated, right? And so I've watched this guy's thread and I've given him a pseudonym, which is okay. You guys, whenever you're doing your journals, definitely give pseudonyms. When you're doing your assignments, use pseudonyms. If they're not comfortable, if they don't know that they're being talked about or anything like that, use a pseudonym. You don't have to give them, you don't have to out them at any point in time. These are just, examples. And so for this one, I did a really quick description. It doesn't even have to deal with a lot of grammatically correct anything. It just has to be something that you can read later. So I put down everyday mediator X posts questions to his Facebook page. For example, Trump describes himself as a great environmentalist. Do you agree? Yes, no, comment. Along with some accompanying article, this time NPR.org. Is everybody here familiar with NPR? They're pretty good at being reliable. I worked for them for a number of years, and in the local station here in Cape Girardeau, but they are really, really good at, if they make a mistake, they call themselves out on it and explain it to their audience and then provide the correct information. They're just really good at trying to be as accurate and unbiased as possible. So I trust that, right? So whose headline read, as election nears, Trump expands on exploratory drilling in the Atlantic. He often has the exact same people comment. Most only do a yes or no response. Some comment at length. The ones who comment at length bicker back and forth about their political standpoint. Most all questions are politically related to current news. So this is just a descriptive. Like this doesn't have a lot of my opinion. It's just kind of what's going on, what I've seen. So I'm hoping that maybe you guys have already kind of delved into doing descriptive writing about your site. Like just kind of writing down what you see, because it is just being able to absorb the information at this point. And then there's analytical notes. Analytical notes, this is where you piece together your descriptive notes to determine patterns of a larger theme. And really, what we're great at doing as human beings is recognizing patterns. That's what we do. And we're kind of hardwired to do it. So as you start seeing these things, as the scope in which you're focusing on becomes more expansive, you're going to start noticing patterns. Things that kind of happen consistently, things that happen or don't happen consistently, but they become patterns within themselves. So as you're writing these things down, you might notice it that you may have not noticed maybe 4 weeks ago, whenever you really kind of started evaluating or looking at some of these sites. And even more so as the semester progresses, you might be like, whoa, this is a pretty obvious one suddenly. So you're looking for those themes, those patterns, and you recognize the pattern and themes in your observations to investigate further. So you may even put like, hey, I noticed this, but just check in later, within your notes. just as a mental note for yourself, written in ink. So here's an analytical example following off of the example that I just provided for the descriptive. And so this is something that I kind of questioned. I was like, do the participants in the questionnaire on Mediator X's Facebook page even consider his questions to be, or ever consider his questions being biased, might be biased? Or the way he structures questions might invite one's political viewpoint over another's. So if he structures it a specific way, is it going to elicit a response from someone who stands on one side of the spectrum or the other as far as political standpoints go? Everyone that responds to the questions directs their responses towards each other and not Mediator X. So they kind of get into this dialogue between one another, but nobody addresses the person that posted it. And that seems to be a different type of way than most people post. Most people post something and whoever responds is talking to the poster, right? There is a dialogue that's going on. But nobody actually directs anything towards Mediator X. Especially when conflict arises between both different parties. It gets away from them very quickly. He doesn't actually even mediate. He just kind of sits back and lets this complete thread hang deeper and deeper into this content. And people get pissed. Like they're getting angry. They're like blocking each other and they can't see each other's posts anymore, but I can see their posts, you know. It gets really kind of heated and it just kind of is a demonstration of people's attitudes right now. What is dividing people between one another? And it kind of like starts to reveal various different things. And it can also reveal, if it divides some people, then it can also be this unified force, yet they don't see that, right? But you might see something similar on your site, depending on whatever it is that people are doing. What is it that is unifying them? What are their goals? So that's an analytical example, and something that I would encourage you guys to start doing whenever you're doing your descriptive. Like after you write a description of something, try to analyze it in a way that you're like, well, what does this even mean? We'll get into that. Also, we have these things called methodological notes. Methodological notes, some notes are those memos to yourself, like, hey, remind yourself to go and do this, that can help you to progress later. I'm sorry, am I going too quickly? Those of you who are writing? If you need me to backtrack any, let me know, okay? The methodological notes. Here's an example. You find that people use certain slang expression to refer to the topic that you study. So make a note to try using the expression in your interviews. Just be like, oh, I heard them use this. Maybe whenever I'm talking to them, I should try to apply this particular term. And even if you use it wrong, they'll probably be like, you can ask them, be like, hey, is this what this means? You know? And they're not going to usually be like, oh, noob, you don't know what you're talking about, and so I'm going to stop talking to you. That's definitely not how that ends up going. They'll probably explain it to you. Additionally, there's another one. So this can be applied in the real world context, but it can also be applied remotely. So you learn that when people agree to meet at 6 p.m., they really mean sometime between 6:30 and 7:30 p.m., and it's rude to show up right on time. So this could be definitely a cultural construct about our perceptions of time, because it works differently in different languages. But it can also work differently in virtual time, right? So if you're on a global stage, as far as your platform goes, if it's 6:30 here, what time is it in Colorado? Right? What time is it in New York? Or what time is it in California? Like suddenly, we're talking about time in a very different way. And even more so whenever, say, I'll give you guys an example. I was a part of a Discord community, right? And this is just that app that you can get on and talk about various different things. This one had to do with a particular video game that I was involved in. And now, just to give you guys a little bit of background, I've been a video gamer since like the early 80s. So this has been something that just is still a part of life and all that kind of stuff. And it's evolved so much since when I was a kid. But we only had, our phones to do this game. on an app and they're like, oh, well, it only allows for so many characters. Jump onto this Discord community. That way we can talk about it in length. And they really organized things. Like they were unified in this, and they were really, really all about this game. But because these people lived on different sides of the United States, whenever they're like, okay, well, we need to jump on at this time and talk. And if I missed it because I was all like, your time is different than my time, you know, it was kind of like looked on, not in a way that they were going to be unforgiving about it, but at the same time, we were like, well, we have to be able to discuss what time we're going to just like get on here and work together through this particular campaign. Otherwise, you're kind of letting us down as your teammates. They're not going to be like, oh, you're forbidden now from partaking in this activity. But they will have various different ramifications based on whether or not you can identify that time and be on there whenever they've requested it. And so these kinds of things have like these social nuances, unspoken rules, making sure, and you're shaking your head like, so you're familiar maybe with these types of things? Okay, so these things become aspects in which you should take note of, not just understand that there are ramifications as part of these activities, but that they need to be written down. They need to be part of what you're observing because it is a cultural thing. It's also influenced by people's perceptions because they're shaped differently in different times and things. So we have that. Make sure that whenever you write that down, you can understand that that is the type of methodological note taking, and it's important for your journal. So for your journal 5, make sure you journal at least 500 words, and you don't have to have it in any type of way where there's spelling or punctuation or grammatical things to be concerned about, because I'm not going to grade you that. Just make sure you have 500 words, and you should be able to get your at least 10 points for that, okay? So also remember, at some point in time later in the semester, you're going to be analyzing all of this information. So keeping a good journal is very important. Otherwise, you're going to look back and be like, oh man, this is a lot harder now that I don't have these good journaling notes, okay? So let's go on and start talking about what's known as discourse community. Has anybody ever heard of this before? Discourse community? Yeah. Okay, well, let's get a little bit more detailed about it because it was this guy, John Quayle. He was a linguist, and he defines discourse community as groups that have goals or purposes and use communication to achieve these goals. And it has a few different aspects to it. One, a broadly agreed set of common public goals. 2, mechanisms of intercommunication amongst its members. 3, uses its participatory mechanisms primarily to provide information and feedback. Utilizes and possesses one or more genres in the communicative furtherance of its aim. teams, but acquired some specific Lexus. We're not talking about the Lexus like a car. We're talking about very specific words used and applied in these communities. And 6, a threshold level of members with a suitable degree of relevant content and discoursal expertise. So let's look at a broadly agreed set of common public goals really quick. And this is kind of like, here's a few examples, okay? So a group of teachers, their broadly set common public goals would be to teach students to help them move forward in life, okay? And we take maybe cheerleaders. Cheerleaders, a broadly agreed set of common public goals for them would be to entertain and encourage spectators to support a team. Another one, a group of pilots. What would their common public goal be? Fly planes safely from one place to the next and get passengers safely from one destination to the next. So we can kind of see that whenever we think of these various groups, they have a common goal. It's pretty, if you clearly articulate it, it's obvious. Yes, that's what they're doing. And even if you don't clearly articulate it, you kind of have a feeling for what they're doing. So mechanisms of intercommunication amongst its members, well, what would that be? Okay, people communicate through talking, writing, texting, email, phones, etc. We know that we have a broad array of various different technologies or resources in order to make this kind of thing happen. In our case, we use social media, especially for our ethnographic research. And then those social media platforms can use fax or newsletters. They can have meetings or gatherings in a remote setting. We now have access to Zoom. You can just do it via like chatting at a specific time. But they need to be able to implement this at some point. Because whatever allows for the members of that microculture to communicate with one another is their mechanisms of intercommunication. There are some participatory mechanisms also. What form of communication facilitates the participation of members in your microculture? Is it voluntary? Like, do people just voluntarily provide that information, or is it requested? Who is it that drives these communicative participation mechanisms? Like with the example of Mediator X, you ask specifically, and it kind of baits those who are participating. Somebody is going to say something with passion, you know. Another thing I want you to consider is how is it that you heard about your particular site? And this can get a little bit messier because we've been so exposed to so many different platforms over the years, but you could have heard it through various different things, like a website, an ad maybe, a flyer, word of mouth. Your friends told you maybe a little bit about it. If you're researching an influencer on Instagram, how did you find this particular influencer? Did they just pop up? Somebody tell you about it? Did you watch a video of something? And so we can try to take a look at a discourse community map because every person is really involved with some sort of discourse community in various different ways. So we can try to think of it as we have students. This person, he's not just a student. He participates in forums. He has an iPhone. He has a Facebook. But each one of these, if you were really to sit down and you were to jot this down, even in your journals for your notes, that each of these various aspects of his life have different goals, genres, specialized vocabulary, and things that you can kind of think of an application to what you're researching. So for him, he's a student. So the goals for students are essentially get good grades, get good vocabulary, use class on time, manage your time. Genres within that would be things like research papers, term papers, lab reports, PowerPoint presentations, specialized vocabulary, board, roommate, syllabus, semester. So we can kind of see that that is a specific thing, really in the context of reality. But he also has a Facebook page, right? And so on the Facebook page it says goals for Facebook. What are the goals for Facebook? Everybody kind of has different goals, but we have general ones as well. Maybe his goals are keep in touch with friends and family, let others know what you're doing, meet new people, general entertainment such as games or surveys. There's genres of them: blogs, direct messages, status updates, chats, Facebook Messenger, specialized vocabulary, places, wall. What's the Facebook wall? Heck, I don't know. The wall. It's where you can post up like photos and stuff. Did you guys ever see that commercial where this old lady was pretending like she knew all about Facebook? Yeah, what happened to it?
This is the one where she was like printing stuff out, like, is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
I don't remember, but like, I used to know.
You seen it? Okay, so she's this old lady, she's trying to be tech savvy and she puts pictures of her friends on her physical wall. And she's just like, this is my friend's wall. Like, and then she's sitting there with her friend, like in real time, face to face, and is like, I'm going to defriend you. Because she didn't like what she was saying. Like, it was just, it kind of played on, it deconstructed this whole concept that if we were to apply these same terminologies in real life, it almost just sounds ridiculous, right? Like, then he's part of forums, right? Goals are to answer each other's questions, add on to conversations, start discussions, meet new people. Genres, discussion with or discussion posts, topic replies, quick messages, bulletins. These are various different things that would be a part of specialized vocabulary. Trolling. We all know what trolling is. Mentioned, right? It's trolling. ROLF. What does that mean? Rolling on the floor laughing. How many of you guys in real life have ever been rolling on the floor laughing? In my time, this has only happened to me once, and it was hilarious. Like, we played a prank on my brother-in-law, and he still hasn't forgiven us over it. But I actually got to the floor, held my stomach, and just laughed. I was rolling on the floor laughing. That's how, but it's only happened once. How many times have you done it, Adrian? Too many times.
I wouldn't count this.
What? Lucky. If you had it more than once, I commend you for that. That is a wonderful life because I've only had it that one time. That's great. iPhone. So we have specialized vocabulary for iPhones, retina display, FaceTime, app, 84, right? What is the purpose or the goals of people, an entire group of people having iPhones? Of course, immediately keep in touch with family, friends, take pictures, access the web, consume media, right? So we have these different things. These are examples of different discourse communities. He's just about to be on the floor, rolling around laughing right now. I'm glad I can bring that joke to your life. So when it comes to the use of specific lexicons or folk terms, we're going to actually, I want you guys to really, as you're observing your microcultures online, really take note of various different things that we're going
going to label as folk terms because that's just kind of how we discuss it in anthropology. And folk terms, I'll give you guys a couple of examples. This is the jargon that's specific to a community. So groups of friends may have inside jokes. Think of your guys' groups of friends. You have an inside joke that if you were to say it to other people, it might even sound inappropriate, or nobody's ever going to get it. It's referenced just between you and your group. I have one. Yeah, you got one, huh? I mean, if you were to share it right now, like people would just be like, we don't really get it. Because you have to be in the context of how it develops. But even more so, sometimes if you express it or explain it, it's like somebody who explains a joke. Like, no, I get it. It's just not funny. And it's even worse when they try to explain to you why you should think it's funny. It makes it worse. It just doesn't apply, right? But you may have these very specific things that you would say to one another in your group that only you guys are aware of. And that's kind of what these folk terms are, or these lexemes. Also, another example, scientists have specific terms that they utilize in their own disciplines. One word I'll give you guys an example of, and this one is used amongst me and other underwater archaeologists who specifically look at submerged landscapes. We talk about the Pleistocene a lot. What do you guys know about the Pleistocene? Why should you guys know or care about the Pleistocene? You guys are you underwater archaeologists who specify in submerged landscape studies? No. So it wouldn't matter. Why would I be like, oh, and if I were to sit up here and talk to you guys about the Pleistocene in length and really like get as excited about it as other underwater archaeologists who study submerged landscapes do, like you guys would look at me like I have an appendage growing out of my forehead. Like, why is she talking? Why is she continuing on with this? I stopped listening along with that, right? But it's specific to that like particular discourse community, right? Once again, we're going to go back to we already understand ROLF, right? What about YOLO? What does YOLO mean? You only live once? It would seem to be like this huge thing for a while where people would always be like, YOLO. And I'm all like, about what? Like, I don't understand. But it means you only live once. How would somebody, describe to me, somebody please who I disagree, in what context would somebody use YOLO? Asia, you seem to know these things. Tell me, please.
Maybe if you're about to do something really stupid, you're probably gonna regret it later, but whatever.
What? Okay, so this applies to something like you know it's stupid. You're gonna do it anyways, and you know you're gonna regret it later. But you do it anyhow, and then you say YOLO. Does it kind of provide a sense of forgiveness to yourself or for others to forgive you for the stupid thing that you're about to do? Is it kind of a tacit thing, or is it like you make it explicit? Remember, we kind of evaluated tacit, right? So what are other ones that you guys know that are very specific? And we use it usually, this is usually used in text messaging, except I'm of a generation that we still like write everything like it's a formal paper. I'm trying to get over that. I'm trying to allow punctuation to be issues, you know, but we still just write everything out. And whenever somebody uses one of these acronyms, I have to like look it up. I'm like, I don't know what this is. I used to think LOL was laugh a lot. What does it mean? Laugh out loud. I know. I was like, it doesn't even make any sense because it would be like if it was laugh a lot, it would be like LAL. And I just felt like, oh, they're laughing a lot. I don't even know how I came to that conclusion. It was just completely misrepresented for me in my mind. But we have various different things that are applied in various contexts to mean something that people end up being privy to if they're part of that particular group. And sometimes those influences of this perception is it depends on the social goals, it depends on the physiological goals, it depends on cultural, right? Also, there's a threshold of members. So the threshold of members, a true community takes beginners, and it takes a ratio of beginners to experts for that community to continue to exist. When there are no more experts to inform novices or enough novices to carry on, the community ceases to exist. So we need to know that there are more than just a couple of them. What am I doing on time? Can you see the clock? You know what? 2 minutes. Okay, so threshold of numbers. Let's think about it. The ratio is dependent to the context or the microculture. Can a class still exist with only 2 members? No? Technically, can it exist with 1 member? Nope. Can it exist with 2? Yes. And I'm saying from a teacher-student standpoint. If you're a teacher and you have no students, you can't have a class. If you have 1 student, you can have a class, right? But once again, the ratio is dependent on the microculture. Can a football team exist with only 2 members? No? No, it can't. It just can't. Connor's all like, I know this from experience, we tried, it doesn't work.
You're gonna lose like every time, or you're gonna forfeit every time.
Exactly. It's just not gonna work out. So there's a threshold of members based on the context of the community. So with these categories in mind, most all microcultures on campus are discourse communities. We can think of it in that reality aspect. Places of employment are discourse communities. Your circle of friends are also discourse communities, okay? So whenever we return Wednesday, this is something that I'm going to try to implement into where we will observe it and kind of discuss how we see these discourse communities functioning on a very familiar platform. I'll use one that usually everybody knows exists, and we'll try to evaluate. Hopefully, that way you guys can then go back and apply it to your own site and really kind of look through it with a finer lens, okay? All right, you guys, see you Wednesday.